we talked about these referendums in eastern Ukraine, right? So we're talking about LPR, DPR, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. Now, the voting took place during the last 5 days. Today was the last day. And during these past days, some of the ballots, were literally conducted at people's doorsteps, right? They would come to your doorstep and ask you, do you want to vote to join the Russian Federation? And now today, it was open to the public so people could come and just drop their ballots in a box, like you would usually imagine, like basically a voting booth. Now, Washington Post, just publishing this, right? Here are the results. And these results are, of course, they come from, quote, Russia installed election officials, whatever that means. So 93% of the ballots cast in the Zaporizhia region supported annexation. 87% in the Kherson region, 98% in Luhansk, and 99% in Donetsk. Let me just show you the map so you understand what we're talking about. We're talking about here, Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. Obviously, a lot of people have been displaced by the war. If I'm not mistaken, they also had voting electronically, which you would, or shall we say voting by distance, right? So that people didn't necessarily have to come back there. But basically what the West is saying is that this is illegal. It's a violation of Ukraine's national sovereignty and its territorial integrity. Thing is, though, you have the other side of the argument is that it's not illegal, actually, because the UN Charter specifically outlines people's right to self-determination. Right? And remember, I was talking about this with my cousin yesterday here on the channel, how, Israelis get the right to self-determination, but not Palestinians, right? Funny how that works. But anyway, going back to the subject of Ukraine, that's what's at stake here, right? And I think it's important to understand something because the population in these regions, okay, in these 4 provinces in Ukraine, they actually tend to vote this way, right? So if you look at the previous presidential elections, if you had someone who is more pro-Russian, shall we say, or leaning more towards Russia than towards the West, you would have people in eastern Ukraine voting for that candidate, and vice versa. In the west of Ukraine, they would vote for a pro-European or pro-West candidate. I just want to show you on this map. This is the percentage of ethnic Russians in Ukraine. It's from the 2001 Ukraine census, and you can see here in Crimea, actually down here, it's the highest. Right, you have an actual majority, so a 58% majority of people who are Russian. Now, if you go here, it gets higher. For example, in Donetsk and Luhansk, you'll see 39%, 38%. And then here it's 24%. As we go down to Zaporizhia and Kherson, it gets lower. But still, you get the idea, right? So, the argument that's being made is that, well, for several years, the Ukrainian government has been neglecting the residents, the population of these regions because they are Russian and they don't like them. And these people basically want to break away from Ukraine and join Russia because they feel more protected, and so on. Now, I'm going to be very clear. I did a full video on this. You can see here the title of it. It's called, Why Are People in Ukraine Voting to Join Russia? Right? I published it just yesterday. So if you want a full segment on this topic, please go and watch that because we already went into detail about all of this. But for me, the biggest sticking point is that when it comes to illegal annexations and international law, how come international law never counts and never matters when Israel is annexing Syria, for example, right? Or annexing Jerusalem, which is, the UN said clearly Jerusalem is supposed to be independent. It doesn't belong to anyone because it's such it's of utmost importance for Muslims, Jews, and Christians, right, as a holy city. So it's going to be a separate body. That was the idea. And the Israelis just ignored that and they illegally annexed it. And the UN, even the US at the time, like everybody on the Security Council came out and said, this is bad, it's illegal. But what changed? Donald Trump comes in and he reverses that and he says, you know what? Jerusalem is Israeli and we are even moving our embassy there. You know what? The Golan Heights are not Syrian anymore. They are Israeli. and the United States starts redrawing maps, literally redrawing maps, official maps, to show the occupied Syrian Golan Heights as Israeli. And so Joe Biden's administration comes in afterwards. And who's the new Secretary of State? It's not Mike Pompeo. It's Tony Blinken. And Tony Blinken goes to the United Nations General Assembly this week. He sits there and starts lecturing Russia about, redrawing maps. And he himself, Mr. Blinken, was saying that the Biden administration is not going to change what Donald Trump did. That he and Mr. Biden are going to continue recognizing the Syrian Golan Heights as Israeli. So when it suits him, when it suits Mr. Blinken, when it suits Mr. Biden, they're fine with redrawing maps when it's good for Israel or it's good for the U.S. They have no problem seizing territory by force. Remember, Joe Biden was a huge proponent of invading Iraq. They don't have any problem with that. But all of a sudden, when Russia's doing it, now they care, right? And even then, I don't think it's fair to compare those whatsoever, right? Because you cannot make a claim that there are Israelis living in the Golan Heights, and that's why Israel wanted to annex it. No, they're Syrians. As a matter of fact, Israel is doubling the number of illegal settlements, illegal settlements in the Golan Heights on purpose so they can legitimize and try to justify annexing it illegally. But there were no Israelis there. This is Syria, right? So you can't even make that argument. You can't even compare that to what is happening in Ukraine, where there are actual Russians living in eastern Ukraine. And I think there was a very important quote. I don't know if this was Putin. I think many people have said this during the last 30 years, that when the Soviet Union ended, from one day to the next, you have literally tens of millions of Russians who suddenly found themselves in a new country. Right? So that's also something to take into consideration. But I just want to show you that the most important point to remember here is the hypocrisy. They are such hypocrites. The West are the ultimate hypocrites. They had no problem redrawing Serbia's borders, right? They had no problem with the Kosovo referendum. They had no problem invading Iraq, invading Libya, invading Syria. Right now, as I am speaking to you, the United States is occupying 1/3 of Syria, stealing the oil in plain sight. Hypocrisy of the highest order. That is all I have to say.